Cool.
All right. So today's workshop looking at how to fail better. And Joseph might be so kind as to tell us a little bit more about his current business. It's actually quite interesting that the model is very similar to the one we're looking at in terms of interdependence, whereby we're looking to have co-investment coming in from institutional investors. So I met Joseph a few years ago when we were doing essentially a sort of accelerator program, Finance Innovation Lab, which I always describe as a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous for people who are trying to reform the financial system. And that was a fantastic program, met some amazing people, including Joseph, and he's been through multiple rounds of funding, building companies, building startups, and so he's very kindly offered to share some of his insights with us. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. So, hi everyone, and also those online. Today I want to talk about how to fail better. And before we dig into that and I tell you a few stories, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who I am and why you should care about what I have to say. Because as far as you know, I'm just some random person off the street. So I'm co-founder of a company called UnMortgage. We raised one of the largest seed rounds of any company in the UK ever, of £10 million. And that was a company with no revenue, no product built, but £10 million in the bank. Before that, I had built the first product for 3 various startups, which have all gone on to raise over $7.5 million. And when I was like 12, this is the fun one, I built one of the top 1,000 most traffic sites in the world. So I've always liked building things. And now I'm at the point where we have a company of 30 people and are poised to potentially be one of the UK's biggest startups. So what I'm going to talk to you all today is about the stories of experiences that I've had and talk at a more strategic level. Because what I found in my journey is that you can be told the tactics of, this is how you do task management, or this is how you write good notes. But actually the key thing is to have the right mental models in place. And even if you're told those mental models, you have to be told them and then fail so you have the mental model to reflect on. And so what I'll hopefully be able to give you today is some of the lessons that I've learned by failing along the way that will hopefully, when you fail, give you a shortcut to moving on and progressing. So the first little story I want to talk about is knowing your end game. So I think this is actually where a lot of people tend to fall down, is they actually don't know what they're aiming for. And my narrative and how I got into where I am starts out with the idea of I like to build things. Ever since I was young, it was making, it was creating, it was the act of taking something from nothing to in the real world. And so off the back of that, I ended up doing product design at university because I thought, I want to build products, make real things and have them in the world and scale up what I can do as an individual. And going through that course, what I realized was actually building physical things is really difficult. Like you have to go and design a spatula. That spatula is going to go over to China, have some plastic injection molds created, which are made out of stainless steel and cost $200,000 a time. And if you make one mistake, that's another $200,000 to recreate those molds. And so what I realized off the back of that was that actually you can have more leverage and create more things by focusing on digital products. And camera readjustment. And so off the back of that, I was like, okay, move away from physical, more to digital, start playing with that. End up joining British Airways as the youngest designer they ever hired, and started making stuff there. And what I realized is that actually building products doesn't give you autonomy to make decisions, because there is the rest of the company, there is the brand, there's the style guide, there's the strategy. And so what I took away from that was actually don't build products, build companies. And so that was a whole other transition where I was like, okay, to build companies, you have to think about how you tell the narrative, how you find a business model, how you do finances, And thinking through all of that process led me to where I was maybe 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, when I finished my previous startup. And what I realized off the back of that was actually building companies, at least for me, wasn't the end goal. And this sounds kind of, I'm just going to say bullshit. But for me, it's the idea of trying to build entropy and taking that from physics aspect of entropy being disorder and trying to build order. Because by doing that, you are maximizing the creativity you put into the world. And that sounds very abstract, but I can give you some examples that are in the business that I run. So our company UnMortgage, the idea is you can't buy a house, you buy 5%, and our investors will buy the remaining 95%. So that reduces the cost of buying a house from buying 100 to 5, like it's a factor of 20 difference. And because of that, you feel you own the home. You unlock the security, the freedom to paint the walls and make it something that feels like home. And if you look at that from the entropy point of view, we're creating order in the minds of people. The fact that that home is now part owned is new additional data, information, and rules that are created in the world that didn't exist before. And for me, that's the thing that I want to do, is to use that as my leverage point to work on things that matter to me. And the reason I talked you through that story, which is a little bit of a kind of winding road, is the fact that working out what you want to do is a real journey. And it changes all the time. And where I'm at right now is probably not where I'm going to be in 2 years' time or 3 years' time or more. But it's something that you should really spend a lot of time on, because the direction that you're heading in is going to be the biggest impact on where you want to go. You know, if you want to be, I'm throwing a number out, if you want to have £10 million in the bank and that's your goal, you may actually realize that actually what you want is you want the lifestyle that £10 million offers you. And if you're heading down the £10 million path, you might be like, okay, I'm going to become an accountant, earn a lot of money, or go work in the city. But actually, you'd get to your goal quicker by taking another route. And so a few things for you to think about when it's trying to work out what is your end game. And one of the things that really helped me was, what are your non-negotiables in life? So what are the things that you will never sacrifice on? So one of the things for me is, I will not screw people over. Like, I will always try to look after people, even if they have done wrong by me. And that's just non-negotiable about how I do. I would not do gambling or things like that, but everyone has different ones. But something that I'm very comfortable in, the inverse of non-negotiable, is what's something you're comfortable giving up. So I'm comfortable working 7 days a week to create what I want to in the world. And you just have to sit down and really think about you and what those things are. And obviously all of you here because you want to enact change in the world. And this is something that you should both think about on an individual level, but also at what I'm going to call company, but it could be a movement level, about what those are amongst the group of people that you're trying to make a change with. Because if you're not aligned at the very beginning when you start out, you'll get conflict down the line. I have friends who, their goal in starting a business is to make enough money so that they can retire in 10 years' time. That's it. They have pretty much no other non-negotiables. I just want cash to be able to retire in 10 years. And they're aligned with their business partners on that. And that means that you're not going to have these very difficult ethical questions around, what am I trying to do here? What are we doing here? So I think it's, kind of step one for anything is to actually really spend the time and think about this. It's something that I look at least once a month, just to question, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Am I heading in the right direction? The next one really is focusing on your strengths. So a lot of advice will be, And a lot of things that school tell you to do is work on the things you're bad at. You know, I'm terrible at languages. I'm dyslexic, so languages and foreign languages are just a nightmare for me. But actually, the skills that I have are that I'm very good at left and right brain thinking at the same time. Like good at the logic, good at the creative. And for me, that allows me to have a greater output on the world by focusing on those skills. I can give you a little example of that. So, do any of you know the Dilbert comic?
Yeah, the guy with the tie
Yeah.
in the office, right, yeah.
So for people who don't know, it's effectively a kind of little comic that focuses on kind of jokes around office politics and bad management and micromanagement, all the bad things that people hate in an office, but in like a comic format. So the guy who wrote that, it's really interesting you look at that from a strengths perspective. So he's a funny guy, he is good at drawing, and he understands office politics, and he's driven and hardworking. Now in any one of those skills, he is not the best in the world. But the combination of those skills that he really focuses and tries to improve is the output of Dilbert. And that, I think, is the key thing when you think about your strengths and not your weaknesses, is that actually what you're good at, if you can focus on them in the highly competitive world you are, there's always going to be someone who is smarter, taller, works harder, you know, is better at writing, design, pitching, doing spreadsheets. There is always going to be someone better. The thing you have to find is, what are your strengths that combined generate a better outcome? And so for me, one of the things that I'm good at, which is kind of the next story, is being a translator. So when we started UnMortgage, it was me and my two other co-founders. And so we're now at 30 people. I did the job of every single other person in that company at one point. And to the extreme of, I was doing data science through to graphic design, copywriting, and like pitching. And that's my strength, my skill set, is being a translator. And it's one of those things that is a useful way to think about your skills and your development. Because in that world where people are going to be focusing on their strengths and they are going to be getting better at the things that matter to them, that translation role becomes more and more important. I can sit between a designer and a developer who will be talking totally different languages and act as that bridge. And that's something that you should think about when it comes to where you are heading. Is if you want to be leading a movement or trying to build a company or even just trying to enact change from within a company you're already in. The power of a translator is that you can move people together and bring them along in the same direction. And there's an example of that I think's, maybe draw it on the whiteboard, but I won't because the cameras and all of this. Okay, well I'll do a little something. No, I'll try it on here if we can move this.
Physical.
Yeah. So, actually, this might be a good one, right? So I'll draw one because the people online are different, right? And are you on chat with the people online?
There's a chat, yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah,
So this is very experimental. So. If that's what the people online see, and that's what the people in the room see.
you might need a dark pen. The light is
Let's do all of them.
Colourful. Okay, sort of see that? I don't know. Yeah, there's a good one.
Yeah. So if that's what the people on the screen see, and this one here is what the people in the room see, what is the shape? Now, if you guys didn't see this, which obviously you can, what do the people in the chats think this shape is? Can we get an answer out of them? Okay. Okay. But the point is that you could have two people looking at two different shapes, and they're both totally true. What it is a cylinder. And that's the power of being a translator, is you can see that from their perspective, they're looking in this direction. So I'm a developer, I'm looking at it from this is a square, simple object. I'm a designer, I'm looking at the sphere. And by being that translator, you can show that the map is not the territory, which is one of those really subtle things that being a translator really enables you to do. This is one of my favorite photos. And we can spin the camera back around. So this obviously is the D-Day landings. And the thing that it reminds me of is, if you're working on something that matters to you, and you have that mission and that vision that you're aiming towards, you've got no excuses not to just work hard at it. You know, what's that? 75, 80 years ago, you could have been in there, having to jump out into freezing cold water and have bullets firing at you. Right? That was reality for a large number of people. We live in a time of peace and so much potential. And it's one of those things where, you know, I work 7 days a week. I have a little time tracker on my laptop called Rescue Time. Often I'll have weeks where I spend 90 hours on my laptop working.
Sorry, what's it called?
Rescue Time.
Rescue time.
And it's one of the things that I've never met someone who's more successful than me that's told me to work less. And that's the rule that I'm running in my mental model, is until someone that's more successful tells me to work less, I will keep working hard. Now obviously, don't burn out, don't do stupid stuff. It should be sustainable, and you should work on finding the ways to make it sustainable for you. But work as hard as you can. So this one here is, what gets measured is what gets managed. So one of the things to bear in mind is, without data, you have no way to work out if you're heading in the right direction, or making mistakes, or making progress. Anything that you want to improve, whether that's at a business level or at a personal level or towards your own goals, you should work out what that metric is that will be a leading measure towards that outcome. And so what I mean by that is, let's say your goal is to lose weight. The leading measure would be the calories you eat, the lagging measure would be the weight you lose. So the leading measure is an earlier data point that will influence and tend to impact the latter one. An example from our business would be the number of people who sign up on our website is a leading measure to the number of people who buy homes with us, right? And that's something that you should always work out and focus on, is measure anything that matters to you, anything you want to improve. If you don't, you're flying blind. Hence the aviator panel. So now I'm going to talk more about some of the more of the business side of this. I think this was a lesson for me that really, really hit home between my first startup and my second one. And that's the idea of focusing on the biggest problem you can. So my first startup was called Ample. The pitch there was, managing money is hard. A bank gives you an Excel spreadsheet, and as a human being, you switch off because it's a list of numbers. People are emotional creatures. We want to engage with things that tell us stories. And so the only way to improve that in terms of how you manage your money is by giving a quality score to that money. So the whole pitch around Ample was, for every £1 that you spent, we would give you a happy score. So spending money on dinner with your partner is a better use of money than paying bank interest charges. And by focusing on the emotion, we could get you to change your habits. Now, sounds like a reasonable business. We got some customers, they would pay us, but the unit economics didn't stack up and we couldn't raise any money. Because the problem we were focusing on was so small. Like, it's a small, inconsequential problem in the grand scheme of people's lives. Yes, people have financial stress. Yes, it can be a real pain. But it's not a big enough problem to solve. And this partially comes back to the question of your ambition and where you want to end up. You know, if you want to build a big company and have a big impact on the world, don't sell yourself short by focusing on the earlier problems. Focus on the big ones. So the difference between that and UnMortgage. So the UnMortgage pitch is house prices are 10 times income and a bank will lend you 4. You need to have hundreds of thousands of pounds in a deposit to buy a house you can afford to rent. There are millions of people caught in this rent trap where they're faced with this impossible deposit that will take them a lifetime to save up. Or if they don't want to buy something that they could afford to rent, they have to shred their quality of life and move miles away from their friends, from their family, from their work into something that doesn't support their lifestyle. You know, we had people coming to us that were renting a 3-bed house with their 2 little kids and could only buy a 1-bed. That's a story that has a big problem that we're trying to solve. It's huge. It's a £1 trillion problem. And because of that, because we are focusing on a big, interesting, real problem that everyone can relate to, we're able to get and hire amazing people because they resonated with that problem we're trying to solve. They saw that it was something worth fighting for. We're able to have customers believe that we're real because it's kind of illogical. But if people believe that you're solving a bigger problem, they'll trust you more. And we were able to raise a large amount of funding to help make this a reality. And it's one of those things that a lot of people, when they're looking at the business that they're trying to solve, they'll be like, well, I want to do this eventually, but I know I can't get there. I'm going to have to sell myself short. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to go from, you know, for a small business or a large business. They're both difficult things, but I think the key thing is that they're as difficult as each other. I put as much work in, spent as many hours trying to get my previous startup working as I have UnMortgage. It's exactly the same amount of work, but the outcome is going to be so much greater. And so it's one of the things to really question is, what is the biggest problem you can solve? And how do you solve it? Which is the next one. So, hopefully you found a problem that is huge and exciting. But the solution you need to have has to be 10x better. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people will fall down on. They will focus on a solution that is an incremental gain. It will be something. So if I take my previous startup, that was, you know, a 2x better than the previous system, but it didn't drastically change people's lives. If you look at UnMortgage, we take the deposit requirement to buy a house from hundreds of thousands of pounds down to tens of thousands. From a financial, that's a 10x difference in the amount of cash you need to have ready to buy a house. If you look at something like the first iPhone, that was a 10x better experience. That touchscreen, that type pad, the whole fact it was one form factor for your music, browsing the web and making calls. That was so much better than what? The Nokia flip phone, the Razr flip phone. You look at Uber as an example. That experience is 10x better than a cab. The fact that you have to call them up, you have to wait, you get in, they're dirty cars, there's, you know, they'll take you on the long way around. It's just not a good experience. Whereas press one button on your phone, you get a cheaper, cleaner, better cab. That is a 10x better solution. And it's one of those things that will take you a long time to work out how you get there. With UnMortgage, we took 2 years to really fine-tune our product and work out exactly what it was and how it worked for both our customers and our partners to buy the houses. But don't get caught in the trap of, I have a great problem and an okay solution. Because you will suffer and you'll suffer and you'll suffer. Find something that really is 10x better because it makes everything easier. Trying to make something that doesn't deserve to exist is just soul destroying. And so if you're trying to do that, it's a very difficult thing to do, to come up with something that matters and a problem to solve and a solution that is 10x better. And the way to turbocharge that is to talk to people. Talk to as many people as possible. A lot of people get caught up in this worry that people will steal their ideas. No one that I've ever met has stolen an idea until it's in the real world. That has never happened. Like, I spoke to about 300 people about what we were trying to do over the first 2 years, trying to get them to, bounce ideas off, tell me what they're wrong, what their questions were, talk to the people that we're trying to raise capital from to buy the houses, talk to the venture capitalists to raise money for the company. And no one has ever copied us until we raised money and we got into the market. And they were like, oh, that's a good idea. Now I'm the copy because there's proof. When you're at the early stages of trying to get something out there, talk to everyone. You never know who's going to give you a little tweak. I mean, I can give you it's a slightly technical point, but for us, we always envisioned that our business model would be, we get the customers, we help them buy the houses, and we go directly to pension funds to help fund us to buy the houses. And that had always been our plan, that we would be the platform, we'd be the middleman, and there'd be no one else involved. But speaking to someone who ended up becoming one of our investors, they questioned whether we would be a platform or a supplier, which totally shifted our thinking from the fact that, okay, we would have to raise the money to buy houses. Couldn't we partner with someone who has the credibility and then just partner with lots of different people who know how to raise money? Because actually that's not something that's ever going to be in the short term, something that we're going to be better at than anyone else. But in the buying houses, scaling up that process, talking to customers, doing risk mitigation, managing when they're in the home, that's something that we can do better than anyone else at scale. And if we hadn't spoken to that person, we'd have been off on a tangent for the last year trying to raise money in a way that we never would have been able to. But because we had that conversation, we were able to get a partnership. We started down the path and we were able to get a partnership with one of the world's largest insurance companies to partner with us to buy the first set of homes. And they're going to...
The first?
Set of homes. And they're going to be committing £500 million to do that. And that is the difference between talking to people and not, is knowing the right path to go. Because everyone out there has insight and value and a different perspective. And the more of them you can speak to on your journey, the better your solution that you're focusing on and the problem you're looking at will be. And the next one is, learn to tell the story. For UnMortgage, what has helped us get there and build credibility and trust and help people understand who we are is the stories of our customers. Telling them of the real situations that people are in. I tell, there's 3 or 4 stories that I rattle off the bat time and time and again because they demonstrate what we're trying to do. And being able to tell and craft a good story about why the problem you're focusing on and the solution you have matter is so important, because stories are how people understand. I can give you spreadsheets and numbers that will show you the difficulty of people buying a house. I can show you population statistics. I can show you there's mountains of data. But that's not what matters. What matters is resonating deep down with the truth of real people So I can give you a story of, one of the people that came to us who wanted to buy a house with us were two teachers that had retired to the south of France and bought a little house. And that was 10 years ago. And now their daughter had a little boy and they wanted to move back to England and live nearby so they could see their grandkid grow up. Now the problem is house prices in France have been flat and house prices in England had shot up. And so they were faced at the proposition of 70 of renting for the rest of their lives to be near their grandkid. And you see, that is a story that has brought you in. You see why I'm doing what matters and you can resonate and you can connect because you can imagine that happening to you. So it's one of those things that whatever you're trying to do, always test the story. And on that previous point, when you're meeting people, use that as an opportunity to test and iterate on the story that you're telling people. Try telling it one way, try telling it a different way, focus on different points. Talk to your customers, work out what problems they have and how you've made their life better. If you can do that well, that was how we were able to raise £10 million. To raise that £10 million, we had no product, we had no customers, we had no revenue. We were able to raise £10 million of stories because people resonated with them. And my final point is, it's a long journey. I'm going to be here for the next 10 years trying to make UnMortgage a company that succeeds. Right? It's been 3 years and it's been hard, but there's so much further to go. But taking that first step, getting from 0 to 1, is the hardest bit because you have no resources, you have no credibility. You try and do it on your own or maybe with other people who maybe aren't as committed as you. And when you're in that journey, I can pause for a minute while we fix the internet. I could have just turned around the laptop.
No, I really wanted to do that. Actually waiting for an excuse to do it.
Don't really get to film that.
Yeah, just twist it.
I'm still connected to the Wi-Fi personally.
I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't like that.
There we go.
Next time we might not go for the cheapest stuff there.
We can see you again now.
Cool.
You ready?
Great. So, as I was saying, that 0 to 1 journey is the hardest bit.
I can't let you hear anything.
Wait a second. Are you trying to check it's not muted? Just open up the app again.
Technical difficulties are always fun.
Yeah. It's the spice.
Okay, got you now.
Yeah.
Got you now. Yeah.
Great.
Sorry, no, just turn it down.
That's good. So, that 0 to 1 is always the hardest part because you have no resources. People are questioning why you're doing this. They don't trust you. And you're trying to do this on a shoestring. But the biggest mistake I see people do is they assume they need to go out and raise money and build a team to make it happen. And actually, that 0 to 1 is the time where you should learn how to do everything. If you want to build something, learn how to build a website, learn how to do all these things and get it there by whatever means you can. Because by doing that, it'll force you to learn all the things and all the skills of the people you want to hire and join you along the way. It forces you to learn to become that translator, to be able to know what that designer is and what that developer is doing, because you've done that. And you know what the role you're hiring for is when you eventually grow and scale, because you've done at least a bad job at that job you're hiring for. So you know what the things are to look out for. And it's just sticking at it. right? You're going to fail. I've been trying to build companies since I was 16. Right? It's been a long time getting here, and a lot of luck has happened along the way, but you just got to stick at it. And as soon as you get to that 0 to 1, you've got that first spin of the flywheel, and then it's just keep pushing it, and just go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and then that's how you get a business. Cool. That's it. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an oversight about how to fail faster and hopefully fail in the right direction. Thanks.
Thanks for the talk, by the way. It was really, really interesting. I mean, my question is quite broad, really. I'm just interested in exactly how you're organizing yourself in terms of, I mean, if you'd like something a bit more specific, it's such a broad question. In terms of your goal and what you're working towards, I thought it was a really good point that's so crucial, so fundamental. So how does it look like for you? Do you have a spreadsheet that you're using to list your values and goals that you're returning to? How does it work?
And this is going to be much more of a tactical answer, because I think we're more at that part of the discussion, is the way I think about things is projects and areas. So areas is the one to start with. So areas are places that you're trying to maintain a standard. And so those are things that will reflect the goals that you have. So an example for me is, so one of the examples for me is the culture at UnMortgage, the culture that we have as a company. And so that's an area that I'm looking to maintain. And so there are a set of projects that will feed into that area. Another area for me is health and fitness. And a project there is I'm training to run a marathon, and I hate running. But that's a project under the area of running. And using that model, you can see how you have kind of one-off things, but also habits. So another one in the health and fitness is I make sure that I stretch every day, and that I get at least 8 hours on average every 3 days sleep. And so those are things that become habits that you can measure. And the framework I use for that is one of my friends, Sebastian Marshall, has, if you Google lights spreadsheet, as in traffic lights, he has a very good framework of tracking those, which I use.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry, what was his name?
Sebastian Marshall.
Thanks.
I wonder if it's interesting that you explained that sort of example of talking to people and they helped you pivot towards quite a different model. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I think we're actually very much looking at a similar model. We were just doing our session yesterday on the interdependence bond and thinking about how we essentially unlock institutional capital. I wonder if you could just perhaps run through how it works and that insight that led you there.
So the journey of UnMortgage was always, the customer side was always very clear. It was part own a home and rent the rest. That was always the customer proposition, and we haven't really iterated too much on that. Because that resonates with people, they connect with it, and it financially works. The thing that we were always struggling with was, okay, that's the model, how do we get the cash to buy these homes? Because buying, even 10 homes in cash is millions of pounds. And so the challenge for us is, what's the right source of capital that has the right amount of scale to solve the problem at the scale that it exists? This is a problem that affects millions of people. You do a number that affects millions of people and costs hundreds of thousands of pounds of time to solve, you're talking about very big numbers very quickly. And so that was where we wanted to get to. Okay, let's go start talking to people. So we spoke to venture capitalists to help us raise money for the company. And they told us things like, we want to see traction, we want to see product market fit, we want to see customer demands. Like, great, okay, those are the things that they're worried about. We would speak to people on the institutional side. We spoke to family offices who are effectively very wealthy families who have, 100 million quid plus, and their job is to manage the family wealth. We spoke to pension funds, we spoke to insurance companies, we spoke to asset managers, we spoke to investment banks. And those were just people that we shook the tree of our network to get to. You know, everyone has connections, just meet them and say, hey, this is what I'm working on, I'd love to get your thoughts. It's as simple as that, and just give them the pitch. Write down their questions, work out what they're asking, see if there's patterns of the question people ask, because that highlights something that you need to work out how to answer in your pitch. And eventually you'll get to a point where people sound, hopefully you get to a point where people say, that sounds amazing. And that's the point that you've got it to a point where you're focused on the right problem and the right solution. And it's really just a numbers game. I think a lot of startup and getting something from 0 to 1 is a numbers game. It's just do more, because that's the resource you can throw at it, is more effort.
I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of the with the model that you're employing, the people have to put down an amount, a deposit. So you're crowdfunding, if you like, or people are putting their own money in, but then the institutional money comes in as well. So how is that structured? Yep. If that's something you can talk about now. I know
definitely.
It wasn't public.
Yeah, no, so it's super simple. We have a list of properties that you can see on our website that our investors are in theory happy to buy and that we think are low risk from a structural point of view and location. Customers can go find one that they like, we'll arrange a viewing. Then if they want to proceed, they need to put down 5% the cost of that house, plus purchase costs like stamp duty. So if that's £500,000 house, they need to put down like £28,000 after stamp duty. And then our investors will put in the remaining 95. And so it's very, very simple. It's just they put in that 5%. And the reason that it's that number is for skin in the game. Right, that's a large amount of money. For most people, it's probably their life savings. So they are committed to make this work. And then the benefit is that they just need to go from that 5 to 20, 25, and then they can get a mortgage and buy us out. So what we're trying to offer really is that bridge. And kind of on that story and narrative point that I was talking about earlier, the thing that we really sell to people is hope. It's that hope that they can own a home one day. And as soft as an intangible as that is, that's the emotional value. And it's actually an interesting point when kind of going to your previous one around talking to people. When we talk to the finance guys, if we talk to them in a finance way, they're like, but this isn't financially rational. They can go get a mortgage, which is cheaper. It's like, yes, they can, but it's not about the financials. It's about having a house near where your kid goes to school. That's what matters here. It's not the numbers.
And so with this institutional fund that you created, you mentioned that you didn't think your role perhaps was to go out and raise all this money. So are they effectively fundraising for that fund because that's what they do, that's their bread and butter?
Yeah. So it's a very simple, effectively a joint venture between us and them, where they will help us from a governance perspective, from a fund management perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and help us raise the money because they have done this. They've raised trillions of pounds of money, and then we will offer services to them in terms of the property management and customer side.
Do they analyse the risk as well, or is that your own? Okay.
Yeah, so they also take from a risk perspective and risk return. Now we will provide them with the data, but fundamentally it's actually their call on any property that we would buy.
Do you have a sense of how much what was the due diligence cost for them for, say, checking a house? Or is it so I mean, we're sort of thinking in the scale of, say, solar projects.
Yeah.
And that's maybe, could be 100,000 to go and do an assessment of a big project. I guess a house perhaps a little bit simpler.
Well, I think that was one of the lucky things for us, is that actually from a operational perspective, we can rely on a lot of the infrastructure that already exists from a mortgage perspective. Surveys, conveyancing, all of those checks. There's kind of like a gold standard because banks have to do that when they lend to you. Now obviously we have to kind of modify all of that from our perspective because it's a very different type of risk profile that we're looking at. From a bank's perspective, they're worried about you not being able to pay the debt. They actually don't want the property. Whereas from our perspective, we do want the property and we value that more. So it's slightly different and we had to tweak a lot of things there, but we're able to rely on that side. So when it comes to a cost perspective, it's survey, conveyancing, which is about £3,000 after all of our additional checks that we do. And like I was going to visit the property each on a property that's between £300,000 and £500,000 right now.
So 1% kind of, yeah.
I can go again. Just based on the title, Fail Faster in the Right Direction, just interested if you have any tips on how we can become better at dealing with failure and more kind of welcoming of it, and if this is like something that if you have some tips that you've learned. You struggle with being a perfectionist or not, but perhaps how you overcame that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's just do it more is my kind of answer. But so the first time I really failed, I used to be in the Scotland under-18 squad for rugby. But the first time I failed was not getting into that the first year round. So there was trials and I failed. And I took that quite hard because all my friends that I trained a lot with got in. And so I just used that as motivation to work hard and try and improve. The only thing I can kind of say is, at least for me, what I try to do is I look back on all the things that I failed on and see how that they were the best thing for me at the time. If I hadn't gone in that year before, I wouldn't have worked as hard to get me into the other squad. If I hadn't failed in my previous company, I wouldn't have learned the lessons around, focusing on real problems, have a good solution, make it 10x better. I wouldn't have those lessons to be where I am today, and I wouldn't be able to make those decisions moving forward. And actually, I would be happy, and this is kind of really odd to say out loud, but I'd be very happy if UnMortgage failed, because I know I would have learned so much going through to where I am now. The next thing I try would have an even better outcome. And I think that's just a lot of internal programming about looking where you failed, because everyone has failed at some point, and looking at them and seeing, actually, what were the things that I gained from that?
Thanks. I think we'll probably let Joseph get back to running his company. We're pretty busy, but thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.